Part 1, Section 1, Shadows in the Garden. The morning of October 31st, 2022, arrived with a cold, copper-tinted sky stretching over the town of Blackwood, Maine. A layer of mist clung to the pine trees and drifted lazily through the empty streets, as if the town itself were reluctant to wake. Leaves carpeted the cracked asphalt, brittle and orange, whispering with every gust of wind. Halloween used to mean laughter here. Children racing between porches, paper ghosts fluttering from windows. But after the pandemic, after too many people left or simply lost the spirit, it had become just another day in a place that felt increasingly hollow. Emma Harper wrapped her cardigan tighter as she stepped out onto the porch of her small wooden house, coffee steaming in her hand. The air smelled of wet leaves and chimney smoke. She lived on the edge of town, at the end of a narrow dirt road that wound through birch and maple trees before opening into a field. Her nearest neighbor was a retired fisherman half a mile away. She liked it that way, quiet, remote, a kind of stillness that helped her write. Inside, her laptop sat open on the kitchen table, a draft of her latest article glowing faintly on the screen. It was an expose about a local smuggling ring that had operated along the Blackwood River for years, a piece she'd been working on for months. She had published the first part online 3 days ago, and the response had been mixed. A few anonymous emails warning her to stay out of it. One, more direct. You don't know who you're dealing with. Emma had shrugged it off at first. Threats came with the job. But now, as she looked out over the quiet field behind her house, she couldn't shake the faint unease crawling beneath her skin. The morning light was dim, pale through the thinning fog. Something moved near the tree line, just a flicker of black against the gray-green of the forest. Emma squinted. 2 figures stood among the birches at the far end of her yard. They were too still. At first, she thought they might be hunters. Blackwood had plenty this time of year, but they were both dressed entirely in black. Hoodies, pants, even gloves, and each wore a grotesque red mask shaped like a demon's face. One had horns curled and sharp. The other had a long, leering grin painted across it. Emma froze, her breath fogging the air. The figures stood about 30 meters away, unmoving, their faces, those awful masks, tilted slightly toward her. Probably kids, she whispered to herself, forcing a shaky laugh. Some stupid Halloween prank. She watched for a full minute. They didn't move, didn't wave, didn't shout trick or treat, just stood there like shadows carved into the mist. When she finally blinked, a gust of wind swept through the trees and the figures were gone. Emma lingered by the porch rail, scanning the yard. Nothing, just the rustle of dead leaves and the creak of her porch boards beneath her feet. It's Halloween, she told herself again. Don't be paranoid. Still, when she went back inside, she locked the door. The day passed in fragments. She worked on her article, answered a few messages from editors, made herself a sandwich. The sunlight faded quickly, the kind of early autumn twilight that seemed to erase the edges of everything. She kept glancing toward the window. The field outside was now a smear of gray and orange under the falling dusk. Around 5 p.m., her phone buzzed. It was her sister, Claire. You're still going to come by this weekend, right? Claire's voice was warm, slightly worried. You sound tired lately. I'm fine, Emma said, forcing a smile even though her sister couldn't see it. Just a lot of work. Work can wait. You've been cooped up out there for too long. I know. I'll visit. Promise. After they hung up, the house felt even quieter. Outside, the wind had picked up, scraping branches against the siding. Emma decided to distract herself. She pulled out a box of Halloween decorations, most of which she hadn't used since before the pandemic. A paper bat with one wing torn, a plastic pumpkin light that still faintly smelled of melted rubber. She strung a few up by the windows, then set a small bowl of candy by the door. Maybe a few local kids would still trick or treat this year. By the time she finished, it was nearly dark. The moon was only a thin slice, pale against the purple clouds. She lit a candle on the table and opened her laptop again. The words on the screen blurred. She couldn't focus. Something about the silence pressed in on her, thick and heavy. It was then she noticed the faint hum, no, not a hum, a whisper of sound from outside, like someone dragging their feet slowly through the leaves. Her pulse jumped. She stood and peered through the window. First, she saw nothing. Then, near the same spot as that morning, at the edge of the trees, two figures stood again. The masks glinted in the moonlight, red and leering. They hadn't moved closer. Not yet. Emma's hand tightened around the curtain. Her breath came shallow. She could almost imagine the cold air between them, the distance measured in heartbeats. She turned away quickly, grabbing her phone. She thought of calling the police, but what would she even say? Two people are standing in my yard wearing masks. It would sound ridiculous. Halloween night, after all. Instead, she decided to wait. Maybe they'd get bored. Maybe they were just teenagers trying to scare the hermit journalist. She turned on all the porch lights and closed every curtain in the house. For a while, nothing happened. She even began to convince herself it was over. She made tea, curled up on the couch, and tried watching a movie. Then came the soft, deliberate knock at the front door. It was exactly 8:03 p.m. 3 knocks. Slow. Even. Emma froze, the mug trembling slightly in her hands. She set it down carefully and walked toward the door, each step echoing too loudly in the small house. "Trick or treat?" she called, forcing cheer into her voice. No answer. She peered through the peephole. Two figures stood on her porch. Same masks, same black clothes. The light from the porch lamp flickered across the crimson paint of their faces. They didn't move, didn't speak, didn't hold out candy bags. Just stood there. Emma's throat tightened. "You can take some candy," she said, voice shaking slightly. "It's by the door." Nothing. The taller one tilted his head, slowly, almost mechanically. A chill ran down her spine. She reached for the candy bowl, opened the door just a crack, and pushed it out onto the mat. "Here, take it. And happy Halloween." The two figures didn't react. For a moment, she thought she saw one of them twitch, a sudden shiver in the shoulders, like a puppet tugged by invisible strings. Then, together, they turned and walked away into the dark. Emma slammed the door and locked it. Her heart pounded in her ears. She stood there for a long time, listening. The only sound was the wind howling faintly through the trees. But as she turned to go upstairs, she thought she heard it again, the faint crunch of footsteps circling her house. Part 1, Section 2. The knock at 2 a.m. The night settled thick and black around Emma's house. The wind had died, and with it went the sound of the trees, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt unnatural. Inside, every creak of the wooden floorboards seemed amplified, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Emma sat in the armchair by the window, her laptop closed. She couldn't focus on work, couldn't even bring herself to play music. Her eyes kept drifting toward the thin gap in the curtains, where the faint yellow glow of the porch light struggled against the darkness outside. She told herself it was over, that whoever those masked people were, they'd gone home by now. Maybe to laugh about it, maybe to upload a video titled, "Scaring the Recluse Journalist." Something stupid and harmless. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that the night had changed somehow. It had weight now, as if the air itself were pressing against the glass. Waiting. At 9:30 p.m., she made herself another cup of tea. Her hands trembled slightly when she poured the water. She tried calling her sister again, just to hear a familiar voice, but the signal was patchy as always this far out. The call went to voicemail. "Hey, it's me. Just wanted to check in. Everything's fine, just a weird Halloween, I guess. I'll call tomorrow." Her voice sounded small, distant, as if she were speaking from the bottom of a well. She set the phone down and glanced at the clock. The second hand ticked too loudly. At 10:47, she heard the first sound, a faint scraping, like something brushing against the siding near the back door. She froze, mug halfway to her lips. The sound came again, soft, slow, deliberate. Then silence. Emma's heart began to race. She told herself it could be anything. A branch, a raccoon, the wind shifting. But she found herself moving toward the kitchen anyway, every step careful, controlled. The back door was locked. She checked it twice. The small window beside it looked out over the backyard. A patch of dark grass and the faint outline of the tree line beyond. Nothing moved. But then there, a flicker of motion near the garden fence. Emma pressed closer to the glass. The porch light didn't reach that far, but she could just make out a shape standing still at the edge of the yard. One of them, the mask glinted, red, hollow-eyed, the paint catching the faint light. Her stomach twisted. They were back. For several seconds, neither of them moved. The distance between them, 30 meters of grass and shadows, felt impossibly small. Then the figure tilted its head, just slightly, the same unnatural angle as before. Emma stepped back from the window, her breath catching in her throat. She fumbled for her phone, fingers shaking. She dialed 911. The ring felt endless before a calm female voice answered. 911, what's your emergency? Emma's voice came out thin and strained. Someone's in my yard. 2 people, I think. They've been here since this morning. They're wearing masks. Are they attempting to enter your home? Not yet, but they're just standing there. Stay inside, ma'am. Lock all doors and windows. A patrol car will be dispatched. Emma nodded, though the operator couldn't see her. Please hurry, she whispered. After she hung up, she checked the front door, the windows, the sliding latch on the back. Everything was locked. She turned off all the lights, leaving only the soft glow of her phone screen. Outside, the yard had gone still again. The masked figure was gone. Minutes turned into an hour. Midnight crept in. The silence pressed harder, until even her heartbeat felt intrusive. She tried to stay awake, but exhaustion dulled her fear. She must have dozed off at some point, because when she opened her eyes again, the clock read 2:03 a.m., and someone was knocking on the door. 3 sharp knocks, not the hesitant taps from earlier. These were heavier, more impatient. Emma's body locked. The sound reverberated through the quiet house, through her chest. She stood, barefoot, moving slowly down the stairs. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Who's there? Silence. She stepped closer, heart hammering. Through the peephole, she saw only one of them this time, the taller figure, mask gleaming under the porch light. He stood directly in front of the door, motionless, the hollow black eyes of the mask staring straight into hers. Emma backed away, breath trembling. Another knock, harder this time. Then, from somewhere in the house, a sound shattered the stillness. The crash of breaking glass. She spun around. Came from the back, near the kitchen. Her mind fractured into instinct. She ran upstairs, slammed her bedroom door, and locked it. Her phone shook in her hand as she redialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? They're inside. Emma gasped. They broke a window. Please, they're inside my house. Stay in a locked room. Officers are en route. Do not leave your location. Downstairs, floorboards creaked. Slow, deliberate steps. The sound of glass crunching underfoot. Emma pressed her back to the door, straining to listen. 2 sets of footsteps now. They were speaking in low voices, muffled but clear enough for her to hear the rhythm. A man's voice, calm and low, upstairs. Emma's blood turned cold. She looked around the room, no weapon, no escape. The window faced the front yard, a drop of about 10 feet. Too high to jump safely, but maybe survivable. The footsteps climbed the stairs. The house groaned under their weight. Each step closer made her body tighten until she could barely breathe. She clutched her phone like a lifeline, whispering into it. They're coming upstairs. Please, please, hurry. Officers are less than 5 minutes away. Ma'am, stay hidden. But 5 minutes felt impossible. The footsteps stopped just outside her door. A long pause, then a faint scraping, the sound of metal against wood. They were testing the lock. Emma backed toward the window, heart pounding in her ears. She could almost see the image of herself from outside, trapped in that little pool of light, trembling in the dark house. Then came the whisper, not words exactly, more like breath shaped into sound. A soft, cold voice through the door. "You shouldn't have written that." Emma's heart stopped. She clamped a hand over her mouth, trying not to make a sound. Then, another voice, harsh and urgent. "Someone's outside." A split second later, a gunshot cracked through the night. The sound was so sudden, so violent that Emma dropped to the floor. Silence followed, pure, ringing silence. Then hurried footsteps retreating down the stairs, the slam of the front door, the fading crunch of running feet on gravel. Emma stayed frozen, unable to move or even breathe. When the police arrived 10 minutes later, they found the back window shattered, the glass scattered across the kitchen floor. Outside, near the fence, lay a single knife, its blade gleaming faintly in the flashlight beams. Emma couldn't stop shaking as she gave her statement. She told them about the masks, the voices, the whisper through the door. One of the officers, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, glanced at her laptop on the table and said quietly, "You think this has something to do with your article?" Emma nodded. He didn't answer right away, just looked out toward the dark trees beyond the yard. "You might be right," he said at last. "But next time, don't stay out here alone." Part 1, Section 3. The morning after the masks. The morning after the break-in dawned gray and hollow, as if the world had forgotten how to make color. Mist curled low across the field, swallowing the fences and blurring the shapes of trees into pale silhouettes. From her kitchen window, Emma watched the fog shift and settle, unable to tell whether it was moving or breathing. The police had left an hour ago. 2 cruisers, red and blue lights cutting through the haze, tires crunching over the gravel until the sound faded down the dirt road. They had taken the knife, photographed the footprints, asked questions she could barely process. Did she recognize their voices? Could she describe the masks in detail? Had she received any threats recently? She had told them everything she knew, which wasn't much. 2 masked men, both tall, both thin. Black clothes, red masks, one voice calm, the other younger. One sentence, "You shouldn't have written that." Now, the silence that remained felt heavier than anything that had happened the night before. Emma wrapped her hands around a mug of coffee gone cold. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the door shaking, heard the whisper again. Even now, the faint scent of broken glass, sharp and metallic, hung in the air. Her reflection in the window startled her. Dark circles under her eyes, hair tangled, skin pale as the morning light. She looked less like herself and more like someone emerging from a nightmare that hadn't quite let her go. Outside, a police marker flag fluttered weakly in the garden, bright orange against the dead grass. It pointed to a footprint, a single one, clear and deep, near the shattered window. Emma forced herself to move. She needed to clean. Doing something, anything, felt better than sitting still. She swept the glass into a dustpan, wincing at the scrape of the broom against the tile. Her hands shook the whole time. Each shard caught the light like a sliver of memory. When she reached the counter, she found something she hadn't noticed before. A smear of dirt on the handle of the back door. A fingerprint, maybe. She froze, staring at it, her heart beginning to race again. She thought of the man's whisper, "You shouldn't have written that." At noon, Detective Marcus Ellery came by. He was in his late 40s, solidly built, with a lined face and the kind of voice that always sounded half-tired, half-kind. He'd grown up in Blackwood. Emma remembered reading once in a local article about the police department, one of the few who'd stayed after the pandemic hollowed the town out. He stood in her kitchen, hands in his coat pockets, surveying the damage. "We found tire tracks by the road," he said. "2 sets, looks like an old pickup and maybe a compact car. Hard to tell in the mud." Emma nodded, arms wrapped around herself. "So they didn't just run into the woods?" "No. They planned it. They wanted in." He paused. "You said one of them mentioned your article?" "Yes. He said, "You shouldn't have written that." Ellery's eyes narrowed slightly. What exactly was the piece about? A group smuggling oxycodone through the fishing docks and out by the river. I published the first half last week. I didn't name anyone, yet. He nodded slowly. You think they read it? Someone did. I've been getting messages. Anonymous ones. I thought they were just online trolls. Do you still have them? On my laptop. He gestured for her to show him. She opened her laptop on the table. The last email had arrived 2 days ago. The subject line was blank. The message read simply, "We see you." Ellery stared at it for a long moment. "We'll trace the sender," he said finally. "Could be nothing. Could be everything." He looked around the house again. The curtains drawn tight, the broom still leaning against the counter, the half-clean shards of glass glittering in the sink. "Do you have somewhere else you can stay?" "My sister's. About 20 minutes away." "Good. I'd go there for a few days at least until we sort out what we're dealing with." "You think they'll come back?" He hesitated before answering. "People like that don't like being exposed. If they think you're still digging, maybe. But they'll also know you called the police. That helps." "It doesn't feel like it helps." "It will," he said, though his voice carried the weight of someone who wasn't entirely sure. When he left, Emma stood at the window again, watching his car disappear into the mist. The silence returned, vast and empty. By evening, the sky turned a dull orange, the light bruised and fading. Emma packed a small bag, laptop, phone, charger, a few clothes, and set it by the door. She would drive to Claire's in the morning. She didn't want to be on the road at night. She sat on the couch, laptop open again. Her cursor blinked against the blank page of a new document. She tried to type notes, thoughts, anything, but her fingers hovered motionless over the keys. Her mind kept looping through the same fragments. The masks, the whisper, the gunshot outside. She found herself scrolling through the photos she'd taken for the article. The docks at dusk, the rusted shipping, containers, a warehouse door half covered in graffiti. In one photo, one she hadn't really examined before, there was something she hadn't noticed. A truck in the background, black, old, with a cracked windshield, parked near the water. Zooming in, she saw it. A red sticker on the rear bumper, a devil's face with horns. Her stomach dropped. The same red, the same grin. She sat back, pulse quickening. Couldn't be a coincidence. She copied the image into a folder, marked it evidence, October 31st, then closed the laptop. The room felt smaller suddenly, the shadows heavier. Outside, the fog had thickened again, swallowing the yard. She stood at the window, unable to resist looking one more time toward the trees. The mist swirled faintly in the porch light, revealing nothing, until she thought she saw it. A faint shape in the fog. Tall, still, watching. Her breath caught. She blinked hard and the shape was gone. Later that night, she lay in bed fully dressed, the lamp on, her car keys clutched in one hand. Every sound in the house was magnified. The ticking clock, the groan of the wood as it cooled, the faint rattle of the window pane. She tried to convince herself she was imagining things, that the shadow she'd seen was just mist, but the unease wouldn't fade. It had settled deep in her chest now, heavy and constant. At some point near dawn, exhaustion finally pulled her under. Her dreams came jagged and fragmented. Flashes of red masks, the creak of her stairs, the whisper of her own name carried through the fog. When she woke, the light was pale and cold again. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she saw the packed bag by the door, and it all came rushing back. She rose, shaky and hollow, and stepped to the window. There, in the dew-covered grass below, she saw something new. Footprints. 2 of them, fresh, leading from the edge of the yard, straight up to her porch. Part 2, Section 1. The Forest Breathes. The road to Blackwood Forest wound through miles of thinning trees and broken stone walls, their mossy edges glinting under the pale November light. It had been 6 days since the break-in, though the memory still clung to Emma's thoughts like frost that refused to melt. She'd spent the week at her sister's house, sleeping fitfully, waking to every sound. Claire had begged her to stay longer, but Emma couldn't stand the feeling of being watched even there. By pity, by worry, by silence. So she decided to leave town for a while. Not far, just into the woods. Away from people, from screens, from the ghost of that night. She told herself it was about reclaiming control, about proving she wasn't broken. Her old Subaru rattled as it climbed the dirt road. The trees here were bare, their skeleton branches swaying against a washed-out sky. A thin layer of frost glittered on the ground where the sun hadn't touched. Every few miles, she passed faded signs. Blackwood State Forest, camping area closed after October 31st. She ignored them. She wasn't planning to stay at the official sites. She wanted to be alone. By the time she reached a narrow clearing at the edge of a ridge, the sun was already low, a weak gold spilling through the branches. The silence here was deeper than anything she'd felt in town. Vast, humming stillness that seemed to listen. She stepped out of the car, boots crunching on frozen leaves, and filled her lungs with the cold air. It smelled of pine sap and damp earth. For a moment, she felt something close to peace. She set up her tent beside a fallen oak, near a small stream that wound through the clearing. Her movements were steady, practiced. She'd camped often in college, before journalism, before deadlines and investigations and midnight knocks on the door. There was comfort in the simplicity of it. Tent, firewood, water, silence. By dusk, a small fire crackled in front of her. She warmed her hands, watching the flames catch the first drops of night. The trees rose dark and immense around her, their trunks glowing orange in the firelight. She ate canned soup directly from the pot and tried not to think about home. But when she closed her eyes, she saw the shattered window again, the red mask gleaming through fog. She opened her eyes quickly. The forest had grown colder. At 6:30 p.m., she turned on a small lantern and began writing in her notebook. November 7th, 2022. Blackwood Forest, Ridge Trail, about 3 miles east of the old quarry. No cell service, no signal. Probably for the best. I'm here to breathe again. Her handwriting was uneven. The pen scratched softly over the page, the only sound besides the fire's low hiss. She paused, listening. Somewhere far off, a branch cracked. Then silence. She looked up, scanning the darkness between the trees. Nothing moved. Still, her chest tightened. She shook her head. "It's just a deer," she murmured to herself. But her voice sounded too loud in the open air. She set the notebook down and stirred the fire, adding another branch. Sparks drifted upward, tiny stars vanishing into the black canopy. The forest seemed endless. She tried to convince herself that she was alone, that she wanted to be alone. But part of her, the part that hadn't stopped listening since that Halloween night, kept noticing small things. The way the air seemed to pause before a gust of wind, the faint vibration of the ground when something moved just out of sight. When full darkness fell, she crawled into her tent. The fabric walls glowed faintly from the lantern light inside. She zipped the flap closed and lay down on her sleeping bag, trying to let the sound of the stream lull her. For a while it worked, until she heard the footsteps. They were faint at first, light, measured, moving through the leaves. Beyond the tent, Emma froze, her pulse quickening. The steps were slow, deliberate, not the erratic rhythm of an animal, but the careful pace of someone trying not to make noise. She turned off the lantern. The darkness swallowed her. Her breathing grew shallow. She listened, counting seconds between each sound. The steps circled, just beyond the tent's edge, one to the left, another behind, then silence. Her mind raced. Maybe a hiker? A hunter? But there were no lights, no voices, and no reason for anyone to be this deep in the woods after sunset. A sudden crack, a twig, snapping, made her flinch. She held her breath, waiting for the next sound. None came. Minutes stretched thin. Then, slowly, The forest began to breathe again, the distant chirp of a single bird, the rustle of wind through dry leaves. Emma exhaled shakily. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe her nerves were inventing ghosts from every noise. She reached for her phone, but the screen showed no service. Of course. Finally, she switched the lantern back on. The tent walls glowed warm yellow, fragile against the night. Her journal lay open beside her. Without thinking, she picked up her pen and wrote, "Someone out there." Sounded like footsteps. "I need to leave tomorrow." She stared at the words for a long moment, as if seeing them might make them less real. She woke suddenly around midnight to the sound of something scraping against fabric. The lantern had gone out. The forest outside was silent, too silent. Emma didn't move. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. The scraping came again. Slow, deliberate, near the bottom of the tent. Then a faint sound, almost like breathing. Her hand groped for the flashlight. She flicked it on and aimed it at the tent wall. A shadow shifted just outside the light circle, tall, thin, then gone. Emma sat completely still for what felt like hours, listening. Nothing. No movement. No wind. Finally, she gathered her courage, unzipped the flap just an inch, and shone the light outside. The beam caught nothing but fog and the faint white trunks of birch trees. But when she looked down, her breath hitched. In the dirt, just inches from her tent, were footprints. Large, human, fresh. They led away toward the trees and disappeared into the dark. Morning came pale and cold, the air so still it seemed carved from glass. The fire pit was a circle of gray ash. Emma sat by it, clutching her thermos, staring at the prints that were still visible in the damp earth. There were more than she remembered. 3 sets now. Her stomach tightened. She stood and followed them a few feet into the woods, careful not to lose sight of the clearing. The prints went toward the ridge, then vanished among the fallen leaves. She turned back quickly. Her tent looked small and fragile in the empty clearing. The feeling of being watched, the same one that had haunted her since Halloween, was back, stronger than ever. By mid-morning, she had packed everything and loaded it into the car. Her hands trembled as she tied down the last strap. As she closed the trunk, something caught her eye. A strip of fabric snagged on a branch near where she'd parked. She stepped closer. It was a piece of dark cloth, torn roughly, frayed at the edges. When she lifted it, she saw the faint imprint of red paint. Her mind snapped to the memory of that mask, the horns, the grin. The cold hit her like a physical force. Emma dropped the fabric and stumbled back. Her breath clouded in the air as she turned toward her car. She didn't look back again as she drove down the dirt road, the trees closing behind her like the jaws of something vast and patient. Part 2, Section 2. The hollow noise. The forest swallowed her headlights within minutes. The dirt road that had seemed clear that morning now looked different, narrower, darker, almost shifting as she drove. Branches scraped across her windshield like skeletal fingers. Emma's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The air inside the car smelled of damp pine and cold metal. She could still taste the fear from earlier, sharp and metallic on her tongue. She kept replaying the footprints in her mind. The strip of cloth. Someone had been there, not just passing by, watching. She pressed harder on the gas. But after another mile, the tires hit something soft and the Subaru lurched violently to the side. She slammed the brakes. The engine coughed, then died. For a long moment, she just sat there, breathing hard, staring at her trembling reflection in the rearview mirror. Then she saw it, the front tire half buried in a shallow rut, mud slick beneath it. The road had softened overnight from frost. She was stuck. She tried reversing. The tires spun uselessly, spraying mud. The sound seemed to echo unnaturally loud in the still air. Then silence again. She exhaled and whispered, "Okay, okay, it's fine, it's fine." But her voice cracked. She turned off the engine and stepped out, pulling her coat tight around her. The cold bit instantly at her fingers. The forest stretched in every direction, endless and gray, the late afternoon light bleeding away. She checked her phone again. No signal. The road behind her was empty. Ahead, it disappeared into mist. She looked at the trees, their trunks aligned like tall, thin bars. Between them, the fog pooled thick and white, almost luminous. She swallowed hard. Then she reached for her flashlight and walked toward the back of the car, intending to gather stones or branches to wedge under. The tire. That was when she saw the footprints again. Fresh, clear in the mud beside the road, leading toward the car. Emma froze. There were at least 2 sets this time, one heavier, deep into the soil, another lighter, more erratic. They stopped just a few feet behind her vehicle. Then nothing. No return path. Her pulse began to thrum in her throat. "Hello?" she called out, though her voice barely carried beyond the trees. "Is someone there?" No answer. Only the sound of the wind, faint and hollow. Something about the forest felt different now, denser, closer, as if the air itself had weight. She backed toward the car and climbed inside, locking the doors. The windows fogged slightly from her breath. She stared into the rearview mirror, half expecting a face to appear behind her. Nothing. She waited like that for nearly half an hour. Every minute stretched unbearably long. Eventually, she forced herself to start the engine again, gently rocking the car in reverse and forward, over and over, until finally the tires caught enough traction to lurch free from the mud. Relief came in a rush, but only for a second, because as she turned the wheel to straighten, her headlights swept across the trees. And there, for the briefest moment, she saw someone standing among them. A shape, tall, motionless, facing her. The beam flickered, and the figure vanished into the fog. Emma's breath hitched. Her whole body went cold. She hit the gas, the car fishtailing slightly before finding grip. She didn't stop again until she'd driven nearly 5 miles, until the trees began to thin, and she reached a small dirt turnout beside what looked like a ranger station. The building was dark, boarded up for the season. A weathered sign hung crooked by the door. Blackwood Ranger Outpost, closed for winter. Still, she parked and ran up the steps, pounding on the door. "Hello? Anyone inside?" No reply, only her own echo. The sky above had turned the color of lead. The last traces of daylight were gone, swallowed by the low, bruised horizon. She turned back toward the car and froze. Her trunk was open. Panic surged through her. She hadn't opened it. She knew she hadn't. She approached slowly, every step heavy with dread. The trunk lid swayed slightly in the breeze, hinges creaking. Inside, her camping gear was scattered. Her backpack had been unzipped, contents tossed out. Food, clothes, her journal. But one thing was missing. Her flashlight. The same one she had used last night. She scanned the ground around her, breath trembling. That was when she noticed faint light flickering deeper in the woods. A narrow beam moving slowly. Between the trees. Her flashlight. Someone was using it. She staggered backward, eyes locked on the shifting glow. The light moved deliberately, not like someone lost, but like someone searching. Emma's voice came out hoarse, trembling. "Hey, who's there?" The light froze. Then, after a long moment, it blinked twice, slow, deliberate flashes, and went out. Darkness fell over the clearing. Emma ran. She didn't think, didn't look back. Her boots pounded the frozen ground as she cut through the trees, heading downhill. Branches whipped against her arms. The cold air burned her lungs. Behind her, she heard movement, soft, steady, not running but walking, following. The sound came and went with uncanny rhythm, always just far enough to make her doubt it was real. When she finally stopped, gasping, she realized she had no idea where she was. The road was gone. The ranger station was gone. The forest stretched infinite and identical in every direction. She spun slowly, flashlight trembling in her grip. "Please," she whispered. "Just stop." Nothing. Then a soft click. She looked down. Her phone screen lit up, unprompted. No service, but a single notification appeared at the top. Photo saved to device. Her breath caught. She opened her gallery. The newest photo showed the inside of her tent, taken from outside through the thin layer of nylon. She could see herself inside, asleep, her face half in shadow. Her fingers shook so violently she dropped the phone. The forest around her seemed to close in, pressing closer. Every sound amplified. Her breath, the rustle of her coat, the faint whisper of leaves. Somewhere behind her, something breathed. Not the wind, not her imagination. A deep human exhale. She turned the light toward the sound. The beam cut through the fog and caught a glimpse of movement. A red mask, half hidden behind a tree, gleaming faintly in the dark. Emma screamed and ran. Again, crashing through the underbrush, branches clawing her face and arms. Her breath came ragged, her heartbeat a relentless drum. But the forest was endless. No matter which way she turned, the trees looked the same, pale, skeletal, unyielding. At last, she stumbled into a small hollow where the ground dipped sharply. The mist pooled thick here, cold as ice. She collapsed behind a fallen log, clutching the flashlight to her chest. Silence. Then, faintly, from somewhere above her, a voice. Soft, male, calm. Emma. She stopped breathing. The voice came again, closer now. You shouldn't have left. The light flickered in her hand, then died. Darkness swallowed everything. Part 2, Section 3, The Ash Light. The first thing Emma noticed was the silence. Not peace silence. The kind that pressed against her ears until she could hear her own heartbeat. When she opened her eyes, the world was gray and washed out, as if color itself had been scraped away. The fog hung low, thick as wool, turning the forest into a blurred watercolor of shapes and shadows. She was lying on her side in the hollow, half covered by fallen leaves. Her clothes were damp, cold against her skin. Her flashlight was gone. So was her phone. For a moment, she couldn't remember how she had ended up there. Only flashes came back. The voice calling her name, the red mask, the breath in the dark. Then running, endless running. She sat up slowly, every muscle aching. Her throat felt raw from screaming. Above her, the trees loomed high and thin, their branches black against the pale morning sky. A crow called somewhere in the distance, a sound sharp enough to make her flinch. She tried to stand, but her legs wobbled beneath her. She caught herself against a tree trunk, pressing her palm to the rough bark. It was slick with dew, cold enough to sting. When she looked down, she saw the faint outline of footprints in the mud, leading out of the hollow, hers mostly. But near the edge, just beyond where she'd slept, there were others, heavier, deeper. Her breath quickened. She followed them with her eyes until they disappeared into the fog. Then she turned in the opposite direction and started walking. Took her nearly 3 hours to find the road again. When she stumbled out of the woods, blinking in the sudden brightness, she saw her car still parked by the ranger station. The trunk was closed now. Her first thought was that she must have imagined it being open. But when she got closer, she saw the prints in the dirt around it. At least 3 sets, boot treads pressed into the frozen ground. One set circled the vehicle twice. Her hands shook as she fumbled for the door handle. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it. The keys were still in the ignition, except for one thing. On the passenger seat sat her phone. The screen was cracked. She picked it up. The battery was nearly dead. But when she turned it on, it lit up with a single notification. One new voicemail. Her heart hammered. She opened it, pressing the phone to her ear. Static filled the line for several seconds, followed by a faint rustling sound, like wind through leaves. Then a voice, whispering, "Mail. Did you find what you were looking for?" The message ended with the soft click of someone hanging up. Emma dropped the phone as if it had burned her. For a long moment, she just stood there beside the car, the forest breathing around her, her reflection staring back. From the cracked window, she got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. By the time she reached Blackwood, the sky had brightened, though the sun was hidden behind a film of cloud. The town looked almost peaceful in the daylight. Small houses with leafless trees in their yards, smoke curling from chimneys, a church bell tolling faintly in the distance. But to Emma, everything looked wrong now. Every shadow seemed too dark, every face too unfamiliar. She parked in front of a diner she knew, Marlene's Cafe, the kind of place where everyone usually smiled and waved. This time, no one looked up as she entered. The smell of coffee and fried eggs filled the air, but it didn't reach her. She sat at the counter, hands wrapped around a mug she couldn't quite feel, and watched the steam rise and vanish. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, said, "You okay, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." Emma tried to smile, "Just tired." But the woman's gaze lingered a moment longer, as if sensing something she couldn't name. When Emma left, there was a newspaper stand by the door. The front page caught her eye, local reporter. Attacked in Halloween break-in. Her own photo stared back at her, grainy and hollow-eyed. She turned the paper over so she wouldn't have to see it. At home, she showered until the water ran cold, scrubbing the dirt and leaves from her skin. When she stepped out, she felt almost clean, almost. She poured herself a glass of wine, though it was barely noon. Her laptop sat on the desk across. The room lid closed, waiting. She didn't want to open it, but curiosity or fear pushed her toward it anyway. When she logged in, her inbox had 3 new messages, all from unknown senders, all with the same subject line, "Still watching." Her throat tightened. She clicked one. Inside was a single photo, a shot of her house, taken from the tree line. Another email, a photo of her car from the road near the forest. The third message had no attachment, just text, "You left something behind." Her gaze drifted toward the floor beside her desk. There, half hidden under the chair, was a small piece of fabric, black, torn. She picked it up with shaking fingers. It was damp, faintly smelling of smoke and pine. Her stomach turned when she realized what it was. A strip from the same jacket she'd seen on the man in the forest. But that wasn't what made her drop it. What made her drop it was the faint sound coming from outside. Car engine. Slow. Idling. She crept toward the window, careful not to make noise. The street outside was empty except for a black pickup parked across from her driveway. Old. Rusted. On its rear bumper, a red sticker. A devil's face with horns. Emma stumbled backward, heart pounding. The sound of the engine cut off. Silence. Then, from outside, 3 knocks. Not on the door this time. On the window, right beside where she stood. She screamed and ran to the hallway, fumbling for her phone, but it was still in the car. She grabbed her keys instead and bolted through the back door, barefoot on the cold ground, breath clouding in the air. She didn't look back until she reached her car. When she did, the window of her living room was open, curtains blowing in the wind. It took her less than 15 minutes to drive to her sister's house. She didn't remember most of it, only fragments. The empty road, the mist rising from the fields, her own reflection flickering. In the windshield, when she finally pulled into Claire's driveway, her hands were still shaking so badly she couldn't turn off the ignition. Shadow barked from inside the house, deep and alert. The sound, for the first time in days, made her feel something close to safety. Claire opened the door, her expression startled. "Emma? What the hell, you look like you've been through a war." Emma tried to answer, but her voice broke. She stepped forward, clutching her sister's arm. "Please," she whispered, "don't ask. Just lock the doors." That night, Emma lay awake in the guest room, Shadow asleep at the foot of the bed. The wind rattled the window panes softly, like fingertips on glass. She told herself it was nothing, just the house settling, the trees shifting in the wind. But in her half-dreaming haze, she thought she heard a sound beneath it all. Faint whisper, low, patient, almost gentle. "You can't hide forever." Part 3, Section 1. The Quiet House. The house sat at the end of a long, sloping road, its wooden frame wrapped in pale morning light. From the porch, Emma could see the tree-line of Blackwood Forest, stretching behind the property, the same forest she'd fled days before, though from this distance it looked almost peaceful. Claire's house was bigger than Emma's, but quieter. It was the kind of place built for calm. A wide yard, cedar shingles, a small pond out back that mirrored the sky when the wind was still. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and pine cleaner. The floors creaked softly underfoot. Claire had gone to work early, leaving a note on the kitchen counter. "Take it easy today. Shadow knows the routine. I'll be back before dark. Lock up if you go out. You know how the woods get at night." Emma ran her finger over the handwriting. Neat, practical, steady. Everything her own life wasn't right now. Shadow sat near the window, ears pricked, watching her. He was large, nearly 90 pounds of muscle and patience. His fur a deep mix of gray and tan. When Emma met his gaze, he tilted his head slightly, as if studying her. "You remember me, don't you?" she said softly. His tail gave a slow, single wag, then stilled. For most of the morning, she moved through the house like someone learning a new language, making coffee, opening cupboards, trying to act normal. But the quiet clung to everything. Even the ticking of the kitchen clock sounded too loud. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, making them sway in slow unison. Their bare branches tapped faintly against each other, a hollow, rhythmic sound that reminded her of whispers. She caught herself looking out the windows too. Often, the edge of the woods was only 100 yards away. The trees there grew close together, dark and uneven, their roots twisting like veins. Every time she looked, she thought she saw something shift between them, a flicker of movement, gone too quickly to name. By noon, the light had turned thin and white. She tried to work, opening her laptop, staring at a blank document, but her focus wouldn't hold. Instead, she wandered through the rooms. The guest bedroom where she'd slept last night. The small hallway lined with framed photos. Claire and her husband, their parents' vacations by the coast. And one photo of Emma, smiling on a summer day she barely remembered. She stopped in front of it for a long time, feeling something hollow open inside her. Shadow barked once, deep and sharp, from the living room. Emma jumped, heart lurching. When she rushed in, he was standing by the glass door that led to the backyard, his body tense, fur raised slightly along his spine. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't look at her. His gaze was locked on the tree line. Emma followed his eyes. At first she saw nothing but the slow sway of branches, then a flash of movement, something pale between the trunks. Her breath caught. She leaned closer to the glass. "Hello!" The movement stopped. The woods went still again. Shadow growled low in his throat, the sound vibrating deep and steady. Emma took a step back. "Probably a deer," she said aloud, though her voice didn't sound convincing even to her. She drew the curtains and forced herself to sit. Shadow stayed by the door, refusing to move. That afternoon, the power went out. It wasn't unusual out here. The house sat on an old line, and strong winds often knocked something loose. Still, when the lights flickered and died, Emma's stomach tightened. The silence afterward felt unnatural. She tried her phone, no service again. Outside, the sky had darkened to the color of ash. The woods looked denser now, the shadows deeper. Shadow paced near the window, uneasy. Occasionally, he would stop and stare toward the tree line, letting out a low rumble that made the hairs on Emma's neck stand up. She turned on a flashlight and walked into the kitchen to check the circuit breaker. Everything looked fine. She opened a cabinet, searching for candles, and found one half-used box of matches beside a tin of tea. When she lit the first candle, the flame cast long, soft shadows across the walls. Comforting, almost beautiful. Then she noticed the back door. It was unlocked. She froze. She was certain she'd locked it that morning. Her pulse began to race. "Claire?" she called, though she knew her. Sister wasn't home yet. Shadow moved beside her, his growl deepening. She closed the door quickly and turned the bolt, then backed away. Outside, something moved, the faint crunch of leaves. Underfoot, she grabbed the nearest object she could find, a kitchen knife, and stood perfectly still, listening. The sound came again, closer this time, then silence. She took one slow step, toward the window. Through the candlelight, her reflection shimmered faintly on the glass. Behind it, darkness. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw someone standing beyond the reflection. Tall, still, watching. The candle flickered, and the shape vanished. When Claire came home just after 6, the lights had come back on. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, both hands around a cup of cold tea, staring at nothing. "Hey," Claire said, setting down her keys. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Emma forced a smile. "Power went out. Thought I saw someone outside. Probably the wind. It's been bad all afternoon. Don't scare yourself." Shadow padded over to Claire, tail wagging once, then turned his head back toward the yard, still alert. "He's been on edge all day," Emma said quietly. "He kept staring at the woods." Claire knelt to scratch behind his ears. "He's protective. Ever since—" She stopped, the sentence unfinished. "You know how dogs sense things. You're safe here, Em." Emma nodded, but her eyes drifted back to the window. The woods looked black now, swallowing the last traces of twilight. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, standing just beyond what the light could reach. Later that night, as she lay in bed, Shadow sleeping near her feet, the house felt almost peaceful again. The wind had died down, the air was still. Then a sound, soft, repetitive, a faint tapping. She opened her eyes. The clock on the nightstand read 2:13 a.m. The tapping came again, from the direction of the window. Shadow lifted his head, ears alert, a low growl rumbling from his chest. Emma reached for her phone, hand trembling. The screen lit her face with cold blue light. No signal. She turned toward the window. At first, she saw only her reflection. Then something behind it, a shadow moving across the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Shadow barked, a sudden, violent sound that filled the room. Emma shot upright, heart hammering, eyes locked on the window. The shadow moved again, retreating this time, and then it was gone. But on the glass, left behind in the condensation from her breath, was the faint imprint of a hand. Large, human. Part 3, Section 2. The Weight of the Woods. The morning after the tapping, Emma found herself sitting in the kitchen long after sunrise, still wearing the same clothes from the night before. The imprint was still there, a faint handprint on the glass. She checked it as soon as the first light appeared, hoping it would have vanished overnight. But it hadn't. It was larger than her own hand, and the shape of the fingers was too long, distorted, almost like something pressed from the other side of the glass. Shadow sat at her feet, ears twitching every time the wind shifted. When Claire came down the stairs, Emma was already staring at the window again. "Em, you're up early," Claire said, voice light but cautious. "Did you sleep at all?" Emma shook her head. "Someone was outside the window last night." "You mean you thought someone was?" "No," her voice came out, sharper than she meant. "There was someone. I heard them." Shadow saw them too. Claire glanced at the dog, who had started pacing near the door again, tail stiff. "There's nothing out there," she said finally, though her voice faltered. "I'll check, okay?" She pulled on a coat and stepped outside. Emma watched from the window, heart thudding. Claire walked slowly across the yard, scanning the ground. The grass was slick with dew, flattened in places where footsteps could have been. But there were too many leaves, too much shadow to tell for sure. After a few minutes, Claire came back inside, brushing off her hands. "No footprints," she said. "No sign anyone was here." Emma didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed on the woods, the way they seemed to lean closer with each passing day, their branches arching toward the house like reaching fingers. By afternoon, the sky had clouded over. The air felt heavier, the kind of stillness that comes before rain. Emma sat on the porch with Shadow lying beside her. The dog's ears flicked constantly, alert to every distant sound. Somewhere deep in the forest, a branch snapped. Shadow lifted his head, muscles tightening. Emma froze, eyes fixed on the dark line of trees. Nothing moved. Then another sound. Not breaking wood this time, but something softer, deliberate. Footsteps. "Claire?" she called. The footsteps stopped. Shadow growled low, a sound that came from deep in his chest, ancient and warning. Emma stood slowly, her skin prickling. The forest stared back at her, silent, patient. Then, from somewhere within the trees, a voice. It was faint, familiar. "Emma." She stepped back. "Claire." "Emma." The voice repeated, softer this time, drawn out, almost curious. Sounded like Claire, but wrong. Slower, the tone hollow, stripped of warmth. Shadow barked, loud and sudden. Emma turned and ran inside, slamming the door behind her. Her hands shook as she locked it. The voice didn't come again. But from the porch, something heavy brushed against the door. A single, deliberate scrape of wood against metal. That evening, Claire returned late from town, shaking off her coat. "Sorry," she said. "Had to stay longer, power lines again." "You okay?" Emma stared at her. "You were in town all day?" "Yeah." "Why?" Emma's throat went dry. "Someone was here. I heard your voice. Outside." Claire's expression tightened. She set her bag down slowly. "Emma, you haven't been sleeping. You're seeing things that aren't there." "I'm hearing things," Emma snapped. "There's a difference." Claire exhaled, then softened. "You've been through hell. The mind does strange things when it's afraid. Maybe you should talk to someone, a therapist or—" Shadow barked again, cutting her off. Both women turned toward the living room window. Outside, the last light was fading. In the distance, near the tree-line, something moved, a shape tall, human-like, standing just at the edge of visibility. "Do you see that?" Emma whispered. Claire squinted. "I don't." The shape stepped back, into the trees and disappeared. Claire's face went pale. Neither of them spoke. That night, Emma couldn't sleep again. She lay awake listening to the sounds of the house, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of wood as the temperature dropped. Every so often, Shadow would lift his head, ears twitching toward the window, then lower it again with a restless sigh. 2:47 a.m. He stood suddenly, stiff and alert. Emma sat up. "What is it?" He growled, low and guttural. Then came a sound from outside. Not tapping this time. Not footsteps. Scratching. It came from the side of the house. Slow, deliberate. Something dragging across the siding. Emma moved to the window, heart hammering. In the faint moonlight, she saw a line appear across the outer wall. A long, pale streak like something sharp had scraped it. The scratching stopped. Then, from the woods, the same voice. "Emma." This time it was closer. She stumbled backward, bumping into the dresser. Shadow barked wildly, his teeth bared. The voice came again, low, almost whispering now. "Come outside." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She pressed herself against the wall, shaking. Shadow lunged toward the door, snarling, his fur bristling. Then silence. The sound stopped as suddenly as it had begun. For a moment, all Emma could hear was the pounding of her own heart. Morning came gray and cold. Claire found Emma asleep on the living room floor, Shadow curled beside her like a sentry. When she opened the door to go outside, she froze. Along the siding of the house, deep and unmistakable, were marks. Long, parallel grooves running the length of the wall, too high to be made by any animal. And below them, pressed into the damp earth, were footprints, bare, human, each one perfectly outlined in the mud. They led from the woods to the porch and stopped right at the door. Part 3, Section 3, The Hollow Night. The weather broke that evening. A fine mist clung to the trees, softening the outlines of the world. The woods around the house had turned almost silver under the haze. Pale birches like bones, pines bending low under their own weight. Claire had gone into town again to meet a contractor about repairs. She promised to be home before dark. But as the light faded, Emma knew she wouldn't be. The sky was the color of lead when the first drops of rain began to fall. Shadow paced by the back door, whining softly. Emma tried to write, to distract herself, but her mind couldn't hold a single thread. Every creak of the house made her flinch. The sound of rain on the roof became indistinguishable from footsteps overhead. At 6:14 p.m., the power flickered once, then went out. The house fell into darkness. Only the faint glow of her phone screen lit the room, pale blue against her hands. The storm wasn't heavy enough to take the lines down. She knew that. The timing was too precise. Shadow growled, the sound low and primal. "Not again," Emma whispered. "Please, not again." She tried the flashlight on her phone and moved toward the window. The beam caught the wet glass, revealing her own reflection, pale, hollow-eyed, and trembling. Then, behind her reflection, movement. A shape in the yard. Tall, still, watching. Emma froze. She blinked, and the shape was gone. Only the rain remained, whispering across the windows. Shadow barked once, sharp and urgent. Then came the sound, a dull thud from the porch, followed by another. Someone was walking up the steps. Emma backed away slowly. The phone trembled in her grip. "Claire?" she called. Her voice came out small, unsteady. No answer. Only the faint squeal of the porch boards. She held her breath. Then came a knock. Not frantic, not loud. Just 3 deliberate, even taps against the wood. Knock! 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 Her stomach clenched. The sound echoed in her chest like something ancient, rehearsed. Shadow growled, teeth bared, for standing on end. Emma whispered, "No," and backed toward the kitchen, fumbling for her keys, her phone, anything. The knock came again, this time slower. Knock, knock, knock. She turned off the flashlight. Darkness swallowed the room. Outside, the rain had stopped. The world had gone completely silent. Somewhere upstairs, a door creaked open. Emma froze. Shadow barked, turning toward the staircase, his hackles rising. Another sound followed, faint, dragging steps across the floorboards above. Someone was in the house. Emma's breath came in sharp bursts. Her vision narrowed. The footsteps stopped above her, right above the living room. For a long time, there was only silence. Then, a slow exhale. A sound so soft she almost thought she'd imagined it. Shadow moved forward, barking furiously, his voice echoing through the hall. Then, the sound of glass breaking. Emma turned toward the kitchen window just in time to see it shatter inward. Rain and glass spilled across the counter. A shadowed figure began to climb through. Emma grabbed the nearest thing she could, a heavy iron candle holder, and raised it. The figure dropped into the kitchen. The outline was familiar, tall, lean, the same long coat from that Halloween night, the same faceless stillness. She swung. The candle holder connected with a sickening thud. The intruder staggered but didn't fall. Shadow lunged, his body a blur of movement, jaws snapping. The man let out a muffled grunt. A sound caught between pain and rage and slammed backward into the counter. Emma bolted for the stairs. She could hear the struggle behind her. Growls, a crash, a shout. "Shadow!" she screamed. But the dog didn't follow. She reached the second floor, heart pounding, and slammed the bedroom door behind her. Outside, the house had fallen. Silent again. No footsteps, no breathing, just the wind beginning to pick up through the trees. She backed away from the door, gripping the phone in both hands. The screen flickered, 1 bar of signal. She dialed 911. Faint ring, then static, and through the static, a voice. "Emma." She dropped the phone, clattered to the floor, the call still connected, the voice still, whispering, "You can't keep running." Emma covered her ears, shaking her head. "No, no, no, no." The doorknob turned, slowly. The metal clicked against the latch once, twice, testing it. Then a long, quiet pause. Through the thin slit beneath the door, she saw a shadow move. Then softly, the voice again, right outside. "You should have stayed quiet." Shadow barked downstairs, his voice raw, echoing through the hall. The doorknob stopped turning. The footsteps retreated, down the hall, toward the stairs. A door slammed, then silence. Emma waited minutes, hours, she couldn't tell. When she finally opened the bedroom door, dawn was breaking. The house was still. She moved cautiously down the stairs, whispering Shadow's name. No answer. The kitchen was a ruin of broken glass and overturned chairs. The back door hung open, banging softly in the morning wind. Shadow lay near the threshold, breathing, but hurt. Blood matted his fur near the shoulder. "Hey!" Emma whispered, kneeling beside him. "Hey boy, you're okay. You're okay." She pressed her trembling hands against the wound, tears blurring her vision. From the yard, she heard distant sirens. She hadn't even realized she'd hit redial. When the police arrived, she was sitting on the floor beside the dog, her hands slick with blood, her face blank. They found tracks in the mud, leading away from the house, deep footprints that disappeared at the tree line. No other trace, no weapon, no mask, just a piece of torn fabric caught on the broken glass, the same course. Material she'd seen in the woods weeks before. 2 days later, Emma stood at the edge of the forest. The house was quiet again, repaired and spotless under the pale November sun. Claire wanted to sell it, to move somewhere new. Emma didn't argue, but before leaving, she felt drawn to the trees, to the place where everything began. Shadow stayed close to her side, limping slightly but alert, his eyes fixed on the shadows between the trunks. The forest was silent. No wind, no birds. Then faintly, she heard it. A whisper carried on the still air. "Emma." She turned. Nothing. Just the hollow rustle of leaves and the echo of her own heartbeat. She placed a hand on Shadow's head. "Let's go home," she said softly. They walked back toward the house, leaving the woods behind. But as she reached the door, a single sound drifted from the forest. The same measured rhythm she would never forget. Knock, knock, knock. The sound of someone waiting. And in the reflection of the window pane, just for an instant, she thought she saw them. 2 tall figures standing at the edge of the trees, faces hidden, utterly still. Then the wind moved, and they were gone. Part 4. After the hollow night. The days after the attack moved like fog, thick, disjointed, without edges. Emma stayed in a small motel in the center of Blackwood, a squat gray building wedged between a shuttered diner and a gas station. She didn't go back to the house. Claire insisted on handling everything. The police reports, the cleanup, the calls. Emma couldn't bear to see it again. Not the shattered window, not the dark line of trees beyond it. Shadow lay beside the bed, his shoulders still wrapped in white gauze. He slept restlessly, whimpering sometimes, as if chasing ghosts. In his dreams, at night, the motel's heater hummed unevenly, cutting in and out. Each time it stopped, the silence swelled, and she found herself listening again. Not for footsteps or knocks this time, but for that voice. The way it had said her name, the way it had sounded familiar. She replayed the night in her mind endlessly. The rain, the power outage, the knock, the voice whispering. Through static, "You can't keep running." The words echoed beneath her thoughts like something half-remembered. The police didn't find anything. "Tracks end at the tree line," the sheriff told her, during a brief visit to the motel. His name was Garrett, a broad man with the calm tone of someone who's seen too much to be surprised. "We followed for about 200 yards, then nothing. Like whoever it was just vanished." Emma nodded, though her hands trembled against the paper cup of coffee she held. Garrett studied her for a moment. "You said there were 2 figures before. Halloween night." "Yes. And this time just one?" She hesitated. "I think so. But the voice, it wasn't just one person." He wrote something in his notebook. Could have been the same guy, he said softly, or someone who knew what happened before. Copycats love this kind of thing. Emma didn't answer, because deep down she knew it hadn't been a copycat. The way the voice knew her name, the way the forest seemed to respond to it. There was an intelligence to it, deliberate, cold, and patient. She started therapy 2 weeks later. Dr. Mara Wells was kind, middle-aged, with a voice that carried the calm cadence of reason. Her office smelled faintly of cedar and old books. "You've described feeling watched," Dr. Wells said gently during their second session. "Even when you know you're safe." Emma nodded. "It's common after trauma," the therapist continued. "Your mind stays alert for danger, hypervigilance. Sometimes it invents patterns where none exist." Emma looked at her hands. "What if it's not my mind?" Dr. Wells tilted her head. "What do you mean? What if it's real? What if they followed me?" Dr. Wells was quiet for a moment. "Has anything happened since you left the house?" Emma thought of the night before. How Shadow had growled suddenly at the motel window, his gaze fixed on the empty parking lot. How she'd drawn the curtains but still felt the weight of eyes behind them. "No," she said finally. "Nothing." Dr. Wells smiled softly. "Then maybe the fear is what's following you, not them." Weeks passed. The trees outside the motel lost the last of their leaves. The snow began to fall, first lightly, then in dense, silent flurries that muffled the world. Emma began walking Shadow in the mornings. The air was sharp, and the town seemed deserted. The local paper she'd once freelanced for had gone digital only, its office boarded up. The streets were lined with faded Halloween decorations that no one had taken down, paper ghosts sagging under the snow, strings of orange lights still faintly glowing even in daylight. Sometimes she felt almost normal, until the dreams began. In them, she was back in the house, standing before the window, the reflection showing not her own face but two pale shapes behind her. Sometimes the glass fogged, and a handprint bloomed against it from the inside. She'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, Shadow whining beside her. Every morning after, she'd tell herself the same thing. "It's over. It's in your head." But on the 10th morning, as she stepped outside to walk the dog, something caught her eye. On the ground, near the motel door, pressed faintly into the snow were footprints. Bare, human. They led from the street to her door, then nowhere. That afternoon, she drove out to the edge of Blackwood, to the place where the forest met the road. The air smelled of pine and ice. The house was still there, though Claire had already listed it for sale. Its windows were covered with plywood now, the porch swept clean of glass. Emma parked and sat in silence for a long time. Shadow whined softly, his gaze fixed on the trees. The forest looked unchanged, quiet, still, indifferent. And yet, she felt it watching her. She got out of the car. The cold bit into her skin. Her breath came out in pale clouds as she stepped toward the woods. At the edge, she stopped. There was something there, faint, nearly buried in snow. A scrap of fabric caught on a low branch. The same coarse weave she'd seen before. She reached out to touch it. The fabric was stiff with frost, but warm where it met her fingers. She pulled back sharply. The forest exhaled, a slow gust of wind moving through the trees like a sigh. Then, faintly, just beneath the sound, she heard it again. Emma, her name, soft, drawn out, like a memory returning. She turned, scanning the woods, her pulse hammering. Nothing. The snow fell harder now, covering the ground, covering the footprints she'd left behind. Shadow barked once, sharp and uncertain. Emma whispered, "We're leaving," and ran back to the car. But before she got in, she glanced at the house one last time. In the upper window, the one from her bedroom, something shifted behind the plywood. Faint movement, a flicker of shadow, then stillness. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept the light on, her laptop open beside her. She began rereading her old investigation, the article she'd written before all this started, about the criminal group that operated out of abandoned farmhouses in the region. She scrolled through the photos she'd taken. Grainy shots of men in masks, black coats, standing near a bonfire. Deep in the woods, she stopped at one image she didn't remember taking. It showed the same clearing, but no fire, no men. Only the empty forest. In the corner of the frame, barely visible, two figures standing at the edge of the trees, both wearing masks, both facing her. The timestamp said, October 31st, 2022, 7:43 a.m. That morning, before she'd even seen them in her yard. Part 5, The Return. 1 year later, October 30th, 2023. The air in Portland was sharp with salt and cold. A coastal chill that never quite left, even in daylight. Emma Harper lived in a second-floor apartment above a used bookstore near the waterfront. From her window, she could see the ocean, gray, endless, and calm. She told herself she'd built a new life, a life that didn't belong to the girl who'd once stood barefoot in the snow, staring at the woods behind her sister's house. She freelanced again, though not on investigations anymore, travel pieces, cultural profiles, the kind of writing that didn't ask her to look too closely at the dark. Her therapist said that was progress. And in a way it was. She walked Shadow every morning along the docks. He'd healed, stronger now, though the scar on his shoulder showed when his fur caught the light. The city dogs barked and pulled toward him, but Shadow stayed calm, watchful, disciplined. Always a step ahead of her, always listening. Sometimes, she caught him looking out at the water, his ears twitching to sounds she couldn't hear. The nightmares had faded, mostly. Some nights she still woke to the memory of a whisper, her name dissolving into static. But those moments were brief now, like echoes from another life. Still, she'd begun noticing small things. Again, a shape at the edge of her reflection in shop windows. A flicker of movement in her peripheral vision while walking home after dusk. She told herself it was just the city, the constant blur of light and strangers, the noise reshaping itself into pattern. But on the morning of October 31st, the world felt too quiet. The air hung still, the sea unmoving. Even the gulls were silent. At 8 a.m., she made coffee, opened her laptop, and found a message in her inbox. No sender listed, no subject, just a single attachment, a photo. Her breath caught. The image was grainy, like it had been taken through fog. It showed her apartment building, the same window where she stood each morning with her coffee. In the reflection on the glass, two figures, tall, still, their faces hidden behind masks. She closed the laptop, her hands trembling. Shadow barked from the living room, sharp and urgent. "Shadow, no," she said, her voice cracking. But the dog was already at the door, growling, ears pinned back. Emma moved toward him, heart pounding. Outside, the hallway was empty. But from the stairwell below came a sound. A slow, deliberate rhythm. Knock, knock, knock. 3 even taps, echoing up the narrow hall. She froze. The sound came again, louder this time, closer. Shadow barked and lunged at the door, his nails scraping the wood. Emma backed away, fumbling for her phone. The screen glowed pale in the dim light. No signal. "Please," she whispered, dialing anyway. Static answered, and then a voice. "Emma." Soft, familiar. Her stomach turned cold. "You left the woods," the voice said, barely audible beneath the static. "But we never left you." The line went dead. That night she stayed awake, every light in the apartment burning. Claire called around midnight, her voice warm but tired. "Hey, you okay? I just wanted to check in. It's been a year today." "Huh." Emma hesitated. "Yeah, I'm fine." "Good. Don't let that day define you. Okay? You're stronger than it." Emma smiled faintly. "I know." They talked for a few more minutes about work, about Shadow, about nothing important. When the call ended, the apartment felt impossibly still. The clock read 12:47 a.m. Outside, fog had rolled in from the harbor, swallowing the streetlights. Emma stood by the window, watching it move. The glass was cold under her fingertips. In the reflection, her face looked thinner, paler, the version of herself she thought she'd left behind. And then she saw it. Behind her reflection, faint but unmistakable. Two shapes, standing near the far wall, where the darkness of the room met the dim orange light from the street. She turned, slowly. Nothing. The room was empty. Shadow stood tense beside her, staring at the same spot. His growl started low and deep. The lights flickered once, then twice, then went out. The city outside disappeared into blackness. For a moment, there was only silence, and the faint sound of breathing that wasn't hers. Emma's voice came out as a whisper. "Who's there?" No answer. She reached for her phone. Again, its glow the only light. The screen flickered, showing a single notification. Unknown number, new voicemail. She pressed play. Static. Then a whisper. "Look outside." Her throat tightened. She moved to the window, her fingers trembling. Outside, the fog thinned just enough to reveal the street below. Empty except for one figure. Tall. Still. A mask gleaming faintly in the streetlight. Then another figure beside it. Then another. 3, 4, a dozen. All standing in silence, looking up. The light from the street flickered again. The figures didn't move. Shadow barked furiously, pressing against the glass. Emma stepped back, heart pounding so hard she could hear it. And in the moment before the lights went out completely, she realized they weren't looking up at her. They were looking past her, at something inside the room. The next morning, the fog had cleared. The apartment was empty. The coffee cup sat cold on the table. The laptop open to a blank screen. Shadow's leash hung by the door. No signs of struggle. No sound. No trace. Only a faint imprint on the inside of the window. A handprint, its shape longer than human fingers pressed against the glass from within. Weeks later, a new tenant moved in. He found nothing unusual except for the draft that came from the old window. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind from the ocean shifted just right, he swore he could hear it. A voice, low and almost gentle, carried through the walls. "Emma!" And from somewhere deep in the building, a slow, deliberate rhythm.